In the quiet town of Riverdale, a farmer woke up to bulldozers ripping through his land without warning, without consent. But what began as a shocking violation turned into a battle of truth, family, and justice. This is the story of one man who stood against corruption, uncovered a hidden scheme, and protected a legacy rooted deeper than any highway could ever run. Jon Miller woke to the deep, mechanical rumble of something unfamiliar. It was just after dawn, the sky still painted with fog and silence. He stepped onto his front porch, coffee in hand, expecting birdsong and the soft creak of the barn roof in the wind. Instead, he saw bulldozers, 3 of them, tearing into the edge of his field. The sight hit him in the chest like a punch. For a few seconds, he couldn't speak. His family had worked this land for generations. His father had planted the oak trees by the west fence. His late wife, Catherine, had tended the flower beds near the road with the kind of care she gave to everything. It wasn't just land. It was memory, legacy. And now, someone was carving it open without so much as a knock. Jon marched toward the machines, waving his arms. The driver cut the engine, looking annoyed, not apologetic. "This is private property," Jon said. The man shrugged. "We have permits. This is part of the new highway expansion. You might want to take it up with the HOA. But Jon's heart sank. He had heard murmurs about a development project. But no one had ever mentioned a highway, and certainly no one said it would rip through the center of his farm. Victoria Chambers. He knew the name before it was spoken. She was the newly appointed HOA president in the nearby subdivision, elegant, polished, persuasive in a way Jon had always distrusted. She had come by once, a few weeks earlier, asking vague questions about land access and shared infrastructure. He'd been polite but firm. His land was not for sale. She had smiled like it didn't matter. At the next HOA meeting, Jon showed up. He wasn't a member, but the development affected his land. So he made his case. Victoria presented polished renderings, slick brochures, and legal jargon Jon didn't fully understand. He raised his hand, asked direct questions. When had this been approved? Who signed off? Where were the surveys? His questions were brushed aside with charm and indifference. "Everything's been cleared," she said with a perfect smile. "You must be mistaken about the boundaries." Mistaken. Jon returned home with a sick feeling in his stomach. That night, he called his neighbor, Ted, a retired surveyor. Together, they combed through old boundary maps, pulling dusty records from a file cabinet in Jon's shed. What they found made Jon's hands tremble. The HOA had submitted new maps that pushed the property lines just far enough to make the construction look legal. It was a lie, a clean, calculated manipulation. Jon contacted the local zoning office, the county survey department, even the sheriff. Everywhere he turned, he hit walls. Bureaucracy, delay. "We'll look into it." "That sounds like a civil matter. Maybe you should speak to your HOA." It felt hopeless. Then, one evening, as Jon sat on his porch with a cold beer and more exhaustion than energy, a truck pulled into the driveway. The door opened. Out stepped a man Jon hadn't seen in years. Thomas, his brother. They hadn't spoken in over a decade. A fallout after their mother's funeral had fractured something that neither of them had fixed. But now, here he was, older, sharper, wearing a state-issued badge clipped to his belt. Thomas worked for the Land Commission. Jon didn't speak first. He just stared. But Thomas gave a slow nod. "I saw your name in a report. I didn't believe it at first. Figured I should come down." They didn't talk about the past. Not right away. Instead, Jon showed him everything: maps, letters, photos of the construction, the videos he'd taken of bulldozers trespassing. Thomas grew quiet, then cold. "They doctored the property lines," he said. "That's criminal. And if I'm right, they're laundering this through a shell company to avoid state-level review." He made some calls, urgent ones, By the next morning, a temporary stop work order was filed. The machinery halted. Jon could breathe for a moment. But then, the bulldozers returned. The crews claimed they hadn't received updated paperwork. Jon knew better. This wasn't incompetence. It was defiance. He drove straight to the construction site and confronted the manager. This time, he brought a camera and Ted as a witness, standing on his own land. Jon pointed to the broken irrigation pipe that was now spilling water into the road, ruining his cropline. "You're violating the cease order, and you've damaged my farm," Jon said. The man shrugged. "Not my call." That night, Thomas pulled strings. A local news outlet picked up the story, then another. Within 48 hours, a camera crew stood on Jon's porch. He gave them the tour. He showed them Catherine's flowers, now trampled. He didn't cry, but his voice cracked. Public pressure built fast. And then came the final blow. Thomas uncovered property purchase records showing that Victoria Chambers had recently acquired 2 parcels of land adjacent to the highway project land that would skyrocket in value once the development was complete. Not only that, but emails and a wire transfer linked her to a contractor hired to accelerate the build. It was clear this wasn't a mistake. It was a personal cash grab disguised as community development. The brothers assembled everything: documents, satellite images, financial records, and even a secretly recorded conversation where Victoria offered a donation to a local clerk in exchange for zoning flexibility. At the next HOA meeting, Jon stood in front of a full room. Neighbors who had once ignored him now leaned forward in silence. Thomas sat in the back, arms crossed. Jon didn't give a speech. He didn't need to. He showed them the evidence. The room turned against Victoria in an instant. Her carefully maintained mask cracked. She shouted, denied, threatened lawsuits, but no one listened. The vote to remove her passed unanimously. 2 weeks later, a judge ruled in Jon's favor. The HOA was ordered to pay for the full restoration of his land, including Catherine's flower beds. The construction company was fined, and the project was placed under state review. Victoria resigned before formal charges hit. And Jon, he placed his land into a conservation trust. It would never be touched again, not by developers, not by politicians, not by anyone who didn't know what it meant to build something with your own hands. At the end of summer, the community hosted a gathering on Jon's farm. Ted grilled burgers, kids played in the fields, and beneath the big oak tree, Jon and Thomas sat side by side, not as strangers, but as brothers again. The hydrangeas Catherine once planted had bloomed late that year, but they bloomed stronger.